this is week 2, and now we transition from literature itself into theory proper. And the theme of this week is feminism, and from a feminist point of view, rationality is male. So let's just, by way of introduction, we've already done the course maintenance. Let's just do a little review of what we did last week, and then we'll get into an overview of what's coming in this week's readings. So by way of review, just a reminder that there are 2 ways of reading the title of my notes or my manuscript. Rationality is the essence of literary theory. And so there's 2 ways of reading that. And then the second point from last week was that literature itself raises questions about the nature of rationality. So as this course gets more and more into theory and strange names and strange terminology, just keep coming back to that. Remind yourself that this is not an imposition on the study of literature from French theory or from continental philosophy or something like that. This is actually a question that is generated from within literature itself. It does come to literature from other places too. Yes, but it's not a foreign question. It's not an imposition. Okay, let's get to this week. So the notion of that rationality is male. What do I want to say here? Well, let's think about Rivkin and Ryan, and let's think about what they say. So, if we were in class, I would be using the Rivkin and Ryan text. I'd be using their introductions. So the kind of textbook introduction to a given school of thought, in this case, feminism, and an introduction to a given theorist, in this case, Irigaray. So part of what I want to do here is I want to teach you how to read introductory texts. I want to help you to make sense of the readings that you've done for yourself, right? So that's why it's pretty important that you do those readings before you listen to this video, if you can at all help it. So that's part of what we're doing here, is we're learning to read explanatory texts. Now, one of the things that I want you to notice from the Rivkin and Ryan introduction is the way that they emphasize certain phrases. And I think that this is, I'm on my way to justifying why I've put so much emphasis on the word rationality and even put it into the title of my notes. The first term that we meet is the notion of the universal, where they say, men make the mistake of treating that which is dominant as universal. In that context, the word universal means that, well, it's universally applicable and anyone can see it and anyone can see it from any perspective. The word universal goes hand in hand with the notion of rationality, because that is one connotation of rationality, that it is objective, that it can be seen from anywhere, that it is disinterested, which is a technical word. It doesn't mean the same thing as uninterested. It means, you're objective and detached and you could look at things in a neutral way. And so there's that. There's another phrase that they use, the phrase male Western conceptuality. So the word conceptuality is another word that is similar to the word reason. Conceptuality, ways of thinking about things. Now, there is a kind of recognition in the word conceptuality that it's the way a group looks at things. So it's slightly different from rationality, but it has that connotation that this is meant to be applied universally. And notice how they throw the adjectives male and Western in front of that. Again, it's their way of saying, look, what appears to be objective and rational and available to everyone and the gold standard is really the preserve of a male way of thinking and a Western way of thinking. So we'll come back to Western, the notion of the Western, when we do next week's lecture on critical race theory. But notice those together. And then they use the phrase, point blank use the phrase male reason, that reason is not something that is just universal. It needs a descriptor in front of it. It's male reason. And that leaves women out of the picture. So those are a couple of things that I want you to notice from Rivkin and Ryan. Then I want you to notice also that they talk about feminisms. Now, I guess I don't want to get too much into this, but I'm going to take just a moment here. Why feminisms and not just feminism? You'll notice that they push the one off against the other. Well, if you talk about feminism as a whole, that sounds like a universal, right? There's one feminism. Everybody can agree on what feminism is. As soon as you start going down this path, you realize, well, wait a minute. At every juncture, I'm in danger of making an assumption that universalizes, that makes this bigger than I really know it is. And that happened to the study of feminism. So feminism went from being feminism to being feminisms, to different kinds of feminism. So keep an eye on that. We'll be tracking that throughout the term. That will come up again. We'll begin to really push into that next week. But that'll be a key idea that we track throughout the term. I want you to be reading some theory for yourself, not just reading about it. And so we start with Irigaray, and I just love this reading. I think it's really interesting and really important. And one of the things that she does in this little excerpt that Rivkin and Ryan give us is she talks about mimicry. So mimicry is a really important idea for her, obviously, from this reading. And it means roughly what it sounds like. It means to mimic somebody, to imitate their actions. Specifically in this context, it means to mimic what they expect. So if males expect females to be a certain way, then give them what they want. Now, why? Why? Because for Irigaray, to do that, and I'm going to get into this in a future bullet, but to do that is already to sort of overload the system. Mimicry very quickly becomes parody. It's like, and I say this in my notes, but it's like when you're in an argument with someone and you simply repeat back to them something that is maybe contentious or controversial. Like I said, so what I hear you saying is that you think that the Leafs have a chance of winning the Cup this year. And just to have if they've said that and then you say it back to them, it can make them think, well, I wouldn't go that far necessarily, but blah, 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 blah. And so that mimicry, sounding back, creates a kind of space for questioning. And that's what Irigaray is after here, though in I think a more aggressive and comprehensive sense. Now here's the important thing about this, is that the alternative for her is to actually enter into an argument against defenders of male privilege or defenders of patriarchy. She says that when you do that, if you enter into, and I'm quoting here, a direct feminine challenge, then what you are doing is you are entering into a rational process, and you are using terms of reference that have been established by men. So you have lost before you've even begun, because you are using their terms of reference, their ways of thinking, their structures, their patterns. And so I think it's a brilliant insight. I think it's an absolutely crucial thing to think about. It should make you think, well, how do I proceed then? Like, what do I do? Isn't anything that I do based on, the patterns that men have established? Well, that's one of the reasons why theoretical writing is difficult to read. similar to why poetry is difficult to read. Poetry is trying to defamiliarize you, trying to make you, shake you up, make you move out of your assumptions, your points of reference. And this kind of theoretical thinking is trying to do the same thing. They're trying not to think in familiar patterns. Now, from Atwood, I don't really want to say too much. I just want you to enjoy the story. And I think that as you know, for sure read the Irigaray before, and then think about how Irigaray's reasoning process, dodgy word for me to use, or the arguments that she makes, another dodgy word to use, the way that she talks. How does Atwood potentially apply that? How does she mimic what's available to her in her society? How does she mimic the past and then create an excess concerning it, or jam the machinery? I think it's a fantastic story. I hope that you enjoy it. I love the Irigaray. I mean, there's a lot in this week that I think is really fun. I hope you get into it. I hope you give it the time. I'll try not to take too much of your time here and now. I think that's all that I want to say by way of introduction to this week's work. Enjoy.